Hi, it's Dana Marie, and here's a few short clips of the techniques I used in my favorite pullover. In this short little clip, I just wanted to show you when I'm putting the collar together, mainly so that you can see that how the interfacing is less than the collar actually. So I usually cut my interfacing out and then I just trim off the 3/8 seam allowance all the way around it. That's the easiest way to do it. Fuse it down to my collar piece. When I'm sewing the collar, when I get to those corners, I will reduce my stitch length to usually about a 2.0. I will take a couple of stitches across the corner, pivot, and then continue stitching and using that short stitch length, because you're going to want to come back and grade this point and you will trim into that notch. So if you have a short stitch length, there's less likelihood of that pulling out. And voila! So here I am applying the facing to the front and neck. At the neck edge, the collar has already been basted on. I start at one edge. Sometimes I will hold things down with a pin, depending on the fabric and how wiggly it is. So I'm just going to be sewing that short bit from the front edge, and you can see that's the little neck edge of the facing, coming right up to that shoulder seam. And then I will grab a bit of seam binding. This is my favorite way to finish a neck edge. I'm not fond of back neck facings because they always seem to want to flip out. It adds extra bulk to me. So this is the way I like to finish my neck edge. So I start the seam binding and just lay it right over top that facing, because when everything is turned to the inside, that'll be tucked underneath. I love using my ballpoint awl to kind of tuck things under as I'm sewing along with my sewing foot. And I just have the edge of the seam binding right next to that previous basting line where the collar edge is. Because what I'm sewing on top of right now is the collar, and the seam binding's right on top of that, and then the garment neck edge is underneath that yet too. Alright, so now I'm right up to that next shoulder edge, and you can see the facing is sitting there. Facing is down first, and then the seam binding is going to sit on top of that. I just get things straight and continue stitching. Then I'll just snip that seam binding off, leaving myself a tail of, maybe about 5/8 of an inch or so, just enough to tuck under, so when that facing is flipped forward to the inside, then that seam binding is just hidden underneath there. Continue sewing right to the front edge. Carefully remove that pin. And then I'll just back stitch to lock that in place so that doesn't pull out. And that's it. My favorite way to finish a neck edge. So after I've applied my seam binding to the back neck edge, I turn everything to the inside, so you can see the facing now is towards the inside, and I'm going to start edge stitching from the front edge, just right next to that seam line. This is going right along the neck. I stitch right up to that shoulder seam on the facing, put my needle down, and then I'll pivot and stitch down until I'm even with the seam binding. Needle down, pivot, and now I can just edge stitch right along that seam binding through all the thicknesses. So you just want to be careful that you keep your garment edge smooth, no puckers underneath, because otherwise you'll end up with a pleat in the back of your top. And I just sew, straighten, and sew. And doing it this way with the seam binding at the neck edge, I have a nice smooth neck edge, no facings that want to flip out, and it feels good up against the neck. So I just continue stitching. Now I'm coming right up to the facing, front facing again. So I'll just stitch right up to it. Take a couple little stitches over the facing so that I can put my needle down and pivot. Stitch right up close to that seam edge there. And I usually stitch, I'm edge stitching, so I'm about 1/8 of an inch away. And then just continue on right to the other front edge. And then just back stitch to hold everything in place and keep things from coming back out. So here I'm attaching the sleeve to the garment's armscye. If you notice, my sleeve is against my sewing machine bed. It's easier to ease in the sleeve's crown cap into the armscye with your sleeve down against the bed. Any portion of your garment that's against the bed, it's pulled along with those feed dogs, even if you do have a dual feed machine. And so it just makes easing that in a lot easier. You'll notice I don't have any pins. I just work the sleeve and armscye together, keeping an eye on the notch at the top of the sleeve with the shoulder seam. So you'll see right here, I'm going to take that shoulder seam and place it right where my notch is on the crown of my sleeve. And then just work continuing around. And this is putting the sleeve in flat, which is often done, especially in knit garments. It makes it really easy to ease sleeves in this way, especially in a knit garment, but it works equally well in wovens. Just keep that in mind next time you're putting in a sleeve. Have it against the bed of your machine and the garment on top. Just continue sewing to the end, back stitch, and you're done. This clip just shows you how I'm going to be coming back and top stitching over my previous stitching when I'm doing the zipper style of opening on this top. As per the instructions, I've inserted my zipper, which is real easy to do because you're just going to be making an opening in your garment front, lay the zipper underneath, and basically top stitch it in place with a zipper foot. And then when you put the facing on, you'll run that facing right underneath. And that's why I use the Wonder Tape. I can just kind of stick the facing to it so it's all held in place. And then I just come back and stitch again over my previous stitching. And everything is held perfectly. All the edges match. No hand sewing. And my zipper is perfectly inserted into my garment front. This is a really fun one to do. Really simple. And it takes just a simple trouser zipper. Closed bottom zipper. You know, which are easy to find. I like using a 9-inch zipper, and I just cut the excess off. A 7 is just not quite long enough if you want that V opening to be all the way down. Well, thanks for watching. I hope some of these techniques clarified the construction methods that I use in putting together this little top. It's fun and it's fast, and there's just a few little different things to make it easier. So I hope this helped, and enjoy!